Hey everybody, welcome back to the Silver Lyming. Today, I thought it would be useful to share with you my own story with Lyme disease and healing from it, and really ultimately the reason why I've started this podcast. I find it so useful to hear stories of others healing, as I'm sure you've heard me discuss before, and I just find so much value in having this information readily available for those of us who are still looking to recover and heal from Lyme disease and tick-borne illness. You can hear through the variety of guests that I've already had on the show how many different forms of Lyme disease that it can manifest in people. And some of us, again, get sick for a very short duration. It can be a really heavy onset. It could be a gradual onset. Some of us go for years looking for answers to unanswered health challenges that we've experienced in our body. And I just want my users, my listeners, to hear, again, the variety of ways that Lyme can come to us, because it's not just one size fits all. There are up to 100 different symptoms, at least, of Lyme disease. It's called the great mimicker because it imitates and mimics so many other sicknesses, which is partially what lends to why some people will go for years without an accurate diagnosis. Another challenge with that is the lack of adequate testing, right? Standard two-tier testing, the ELISA and Western blot test, are 50 to 65% accurate at best, which is terrifying for a diagnostic tool because you're putting your faith in the doctor's putting his or her faith in that test, and when it comes back negative, we're assuming that we've done what we needed to on that front and move on to the next thing. And indeed, it could still be that tick-borne illness challenge. So I just hope that you're enjoying these and learning from them. I know I've gotten some really good feedback with regard to how much it helps people's souls, but also how much education people are getting out of these episodes. So if you are not familiar with Lyme disease, I'm grateful for you, but you definitely want to become aware of it because it's becoming more and more common as ticks seem to expand in population, and the concentration of sickness seems to heighten as well. So recent statistics from the CDC say about 400 to 500,000 people a year in the United States are infected with Lyme and tick-borne illness. That's a really big problem. So we really need to be, again, more mindful when we're going outside, when we're taking time to enjoy nature, to just take a few extra seconds to take some preventative measures like putting on repellent, tucking our pants into our socks, wearing a hat, light colored clothing, pulling your hair up. What else could you do? You could wear long sleeves, anything really that's going to cover your skin. I've seen people put duct tape backwards or inside out rather around the bottom half of their legs because generally speaking, ticks are going to crawl up from the ground and the grass onto our person. And so that will prevent them from even crawling up onto us. You can put permethrin on your clothing and shoes. That gives you about 70 times the prevention against a tick coming onto you in the first place. So there are definitely a lot of ways that you can go about keeping yourself safe. So I'm going to share with you again today my story with Lyme and tick-borne illness as another area of hope for people, but also another place to pay attention and say, okay, this took me 7 years at least to get a diagnosis and another 6 years to fix myself. I wouldn't wish this on my own enemy, and I really hope that you're not left to be one of those people who struggles for years on end with no answer to what's going on in your body. Again, my name is Desjardins, for those of you who are not familiar with me. It has been actually about 6 years to the day, about 2 more weeks, it'll be 6 years that I had gotten my diagnosis with Lyme disease and tick-borne illness. And at that time, I really didn't know that much about it. So I was, again, thinking, okay, cool, I got a diagnosis of Lyme. I'm going to take a couple antibiotics or, 2-3 weeks worth of doxycycline, and I'm going to be fixed. Well, little did I know that was just going to be the beginning of this journey that I've walked now for another 6 years, fixing myself with Lyme and tick-borne illness. And so when I first became sick, I really think that my soul was dying because of some situations that I had put myself into. And I just really want to call that out to people to take the time to acknowledge yourself and how you're feeling inside. If you're not feeling right or at peace and there's unrest in your soul, please do yourself a huge favor and stop and really wrestle with that and figure out why that's there. Because if you're not acknowledging that, that ultimately is just going to become a gigantic catalyst for things to be attracted to you, A, that are not positive, or B, for physical manifestations of dis-ease to occur in the body. And again, that's what I think ultimately happened to me. If you're not familiar, through my 20s, I had made some poor life decisions, and I was unfortunately dating an alcoholic person who was abusive in his behaviors, and I really tolerated it, I guess, in a sense, because at that time, there really should be there should be no tolerating it at all. But at that time, I was doing a lot to finish my college. I had gone back to school. I had dropped out after my freshman year. Things just didn't go so good for me, and it just wasn't the right time. So I took some time off, got some life experience, figured my stuff out that way, and decided that going back to college would be the best thing for me. But I was taking 5 to 6 classes a semester in addition to working 2 jobs, which was a lot. And then taking care of a household and dealing with this alcoholic person who was just definitely very toxic. And I just got in over my head. I was too proud to speak this to my friends. I never complained about anything. I was the good little soldier who just sucked it up and figured that it was going to work itself out, or that this is what life was really about. And that's just how it goes. And so again, I just put up with it. Ultimately, in the end, I'm so glad things happened the way they did, although it was a pretty traumatic ending. That person got into their 3rd DUI driving accident in the time that I had been with them. And I had said, enough, like, this is going crazy. And I just was so tired of working so hard to get ahead, and then having him take me back 20 steps. Like, I said I couldn't do this anymore. I was with that person for 9 years. I figured that was a pretty long investment into something to just walk away from it. But I had the thought, and ladies, if you're in an abusive relationship, think about this. The rest of my life, hopefully, was going to be a lot longer than 9 years. And so I owed it to myself to get away from that person, because I was in such a bad space. And I remember I went to a massage therapist, and I, again, hadn't spoken to anyone about any of this that was happening. And I won't go into the gory details here. There's really no need to rehash it. I just know that it was not a healthy place for me. It was a very toxic place that I allowed to happen around me. And I was at this massage therapist, and she was like, you know, your soul is dying. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good to know. And I just couldn't believe that she could see it, right? Like, I knew that was going on. I knew I had a lot of unrest inside. I knew that there was things that I was not proud of, or things that I was very ashamed of that I was enduring. But again, I didn't tell anyone. And so when she called me out on that, I remember driving home from that appointment sobbing, because I knew what I had to do. And I knew it was sort of the beginning of the end. And when I got home, I can't remember if that was like right before the accident that he got into or right after, but regardless, it was all kind of at the same time. And when that accident occurred, I just knew, like, that was it. That was it. I was done. I was not putting up with that anymore. I was not going to live there and do that any longer. And so I asked that person to leave my home, which, Grandma, I love you so much. My grandmother always told me, unless you're married to someone, you do not put them on your mortgage. And I'm so grateful that I did not have that hurdle to overcome at the end, because getting away from an abusive situation, I always wonder why people stay. But I can say from my own experience that it was one of the hardest things that I ever did to end it and to get away. And if you want to go get a PFA against someone, you actually have to go to court and see the person and talk about it in front of them. Like, that's the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to get away from that person and not see them at all. I was terrified of them. So I opted not to do that. And shortly thereafter is when I started to feel symptoms. I don't know if I got bit right then, or if I think I got bit when I was 20, actually. And that's when some weird wonky things started happening in my body from a health perspective. And then I think that period in my 20s was kind of like the pressure on the coal. And unfortunately, it didn't quite manifest a diamond right away. It manifested some evil, wacky, messy stuff. And I had to really work through that. But initially, I had this horrible fatigue. I would cry a lot, but I mean, given what I had just gone through, I kind of thought that was normal. I would get this weird sensation on the left side of my face. I was getting hives often when I would sweat. Like, if I went for a jog or mowed the lawn, I was covered in hives here on my chest. I had insomnia. I had night sweats. I do remember a few nights that I actually woke up gasping for air, which I gather is air hunger. what else weird stuff started to happen? It was just like all these little things that started to occur. And so I thought potentially I had apnea because I was so fatigued. And I know that runs in my family. So I went to go get a sleep study test done. And I didn't have apnea, but they did notice some irregularities. And so they asked me to stay the next day to do a nap study where they put you into a nap for five different times for 20 minutes apiece. And 3 out of the 5 naps, I went into REM within 5 minutes, which they thought was very abnormal, and diagnosed me at that point with narcolepsy. I knew I didn't have narcolepsy, but knowing what I know now and having had a little bit more education about what happens to the brain, it actually does mimic some patterns of narcolepsy. So they were seeing disturbances, but it just wasn't the right kind. And they put me on something called Provigil, which is a shift sleep disorder stimulant. And that really did nothing for me except cost a lot of money. Even with insurance, it was still like $1,000 a month. And I just said to myself, this isn't doing anything to me. When I went back to the doctor, I said, listen, how long until this stuff takes effect? Because I'm still incredibly fatigued. And he couldn't believe it. Like, he looked at me like I was cuckoo and that there's no way I could still be tired and it should have taken effect immediately. And I was like, well, listen, I don't feel any different. And in my head, I'm just speeding up my internal clock to die faster by taking some kind of a stimulant. And so I stopped taking it. And then they did a lot of other tests on me. We went through allergy testing because, again, things just weren't making sense. And some of the test results, I do remember I had some slightly elevated thyroid readings, which when they sent to the specialist, it was dismissed saying that everything was fine. My white blood cell count was off as well, but I had just gotten over a cold, which they attributed that to that. So again, there was these little things that were coming back in my blood work, but were just getting dismissed because they were not acute enough or indicative enough of something serious happening. Okay, fine. And again, I think I got extra support in a sense because my father, who now is a retired physician, was still practicing at the time and well known in our community. And those doctors, out of respect just for that fact alone, and my father being a physician, really did their due diligence to try to figure out what was wrong with me. However, not once did Lyme disease or tick-borne illness come up. And that is just crazy to me. I can remember I would beg my gynecologist because I was so tired all the time. And I would be like, please, don't you know of anybody else who's this tired? I remember begging my father at one point, doesn't anyone in the ER come see you that's complaining of fatigue like this? And he's like, no, honey, I'm really, not sure what's happening with you. And so I had a conversation at one point with my aunt, God love her. And she told me that around my age, that was my mid-30s then, she also was experiencing incredible fatigue. Mind you, I think she had 3 children by this point. And so I can see why she was probably experiencing a lot of fatigue. But that gave me enough hope to hold on and just keep going, because I can tell you, in the middle of all that, I really was very close to pulling the plug. I did not want to be alive any longer. I felt ratty every single day of my life. I cried immensely, constantly. My OCD was off the charts. I'd leave my house and I'd come back and check to make sure I locked my door, or I turned on my alarm system. I eventually got the digital one on my phone so I could see, and I have cameras so I can see. Like, I was going insane. It was just not normal behavior. And again, all of this I feel is driven from the Lyme and tick-borne illness. If you're not familiar, it can actually, once it crosses your blood-brain barrier, it will inflame the brain. And so normal brains are smooth, from my understanding. And when you have this kind of infection going on, your brain ridges actually become scalloped. Like, you can see visibly inflammation going on in the brain. And so of course it's going to cause different emotions and a different spectrum of a human to come out, because the brain is being inflamed or angry or squeezed in different places or whatever. Once that inflammation happens, I think it like squeezes off different parts of normal brain function. Mine lived back here in my head. I know that might sound strange, but I could feel it and I knew it was in there. And I think one of the things that really helped me a lot was the use of essential oils. I don't know how many other people use essential oils, but I would apply them to the bottom of my feet. I inhaled them. I would go occasionally for a massage technique called raindrop, where they put a variety of different essential oils along your spine and on your feet. And it's crazy the reactions that my body would have when these things were applied. I would cry uncontrollably or just release different things. And, once I actually got a diagnosis, I mean, maybe halfway through, so I'm probably like halfway through, forgive me, where I had all these wonky symptoms and I was getting tested and doing the allergy stuff and the apnea and the narcolepsy and this and that. And I knew again that it was none of this. And my gynecologist was no help. I went to the dentist at one point and my hygienist asked me if something had changed with me because the plaque on my teeth was different to her. And so this was a medical person that was actually acknowledging that she could physically see something was different in my body. And I just burst into tears and I begged her and I was like, please, this is what's happening. I feel so tired all the time. Can you help me? And she suggested that I got screened for vitamin D deficiency, anemia, thyroid dysfunction, and diabetes. And I had already been tested for these things, but I was willing to go back just in case because, again, I was starting to feel so horrible every day of my life. I just didn't want to do it anymore. So those things got tested again. Everything was fine. I went to a family physician and I laugh about this. This is actually a pretty funny story. My dad sent me to this doctor who he happened to know. And I go and my aunt was telling me about this guy too, a different aunt than the previous one mentioned. And I went to this appointment and I remember I was wearing a light blue pencil skirt. And this doctor walked in and oh my gosh, he was so good looking. And I was in such a weird place. I started to sweat. I couldn't really control myself. I managed to survive through that appointment, but of course my blood pressure was super high. And I can remember when I got up, I had to wait for them to leave the room because I sweat so bad. It looked like I had urinated or like wet my pants because I had so much sweat because that guy made me so nervous. And I remember leaving there and I was like, oh my God, I'm never coming back to this place again. But that guy didn't know what was wrong with me either. And I called my aunt after that and I was like, hello, why did you not give me a warning that I was going to see Dr. GQ here, you know? And she chuckled and she was like, oh, Dr. McDreamy. And I was like, you know, that's not funny at all. I felt really kind of like set up to go to this appointment. But at any rate, you know, it's just one of those kind of funny things along the journey of trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I actually had to go in the ladies' room there and use the hand dryer to dry the back of my skirt. That is how much I sweat. Oof. Anywho, never went back to that guy. And so after that, I think that's probably about the time that I just started to drink like a fish because I was tired of going to doctors. I was tired of being told it was because I was too stressed. I was tired of being looked at like I was an overly emotional female because I did cry a lot, you know, and again, that's my brain was not right. Like that was, and when you're tired and you don't feel well every day, like you get pretty desperate and you do cry pretty often when you're like, please, can you beg, like I'm begging you, can you please help me with my life? Something is drastically wrong with me. It's terrible that I had to cry to beg and have someone help me. And I still got nowhere, but you know, I started to drink a lot. I was still working, which I'm grateful for in a sense. The job I had at the time was very challenging and I was working 10 to 12 hours a day easily. And I think that's actually partially what helped save my life because I didn't have any other option to pay my bills. And so I forced myself to get up every day and go to work, but I would come home, I'd grab the bottle of vodka, I'd put it to my lips, I skipped the cup, figured less to do later. Because at that point I was struggling to even do things like wash, take care of my house, go to the grocery store, cook food. It was impossible to pretty much just exist as a normal human. And I remember also I had a lot of anger. And I don't know if that's the Bartonella that I found out that I had then, if that was the Bart rage, or if I was just legitimately that pissed off about how my life was. And I was so angry at God, I just figured that he made me like systemically broken. And that there was something wrong with me deep down inside, how my body was wired, and eventually I was going to die and they'd find me on the sidewalk and they would acknowledge that there was something legitimately wrong with me. But in the interim, I drank like a fish. I would get up the next day, go to work, and do it all over again. And I existed in that space for like 3 years. And it would occur to me many times while I was doing this, like how unhealthy of behavior that was for me and how much that was probably detrimental to my liver, to my body. But I didn't care anymore because I couldn't understand how people are having kids, how they're out living their life when I can't even get up to go hang out with my friends. I remember one time when a friend came home from California over the Christmas holidays and he wanted to hang out with me. I wanted to see him so badly, but I couldn't get myself off the couch. I was sitting there just sobbing hysterically because I could not get myself up. I could not manifest enough energy to get up. That is terrifying. And I felt like such a horrible person. I felt like a horrible friend. I couldn't remember my friends' names, my friends' kids' names, the events happening in my family and friends' lives to talk to people. Oh, that was another thing. I couldn't remember words. I couldn't follow conversations. I couldn't watch TV because I couldn't remember what I was watching. Couldn't read a book, couldn't process the words. So my world became very limited and lonely. And really, my parents are pretty much one of the only people that would see me in this space. I kind of became a hermit, and I would cry a lot, and we didn't know what was wrong with me. They didn't really know that there was anything wrong with me because I stopped talking about it. When you're told by doctors over and over that there's nothing wrong with you, you stop talking about it because you feel like a crazy person. At least that's what I did. And, you know, it's kind of a shame. I gave up on myself a bit, but it is how it is, and things happen the way that they were supposed to, I guess, ultimately in the end, but it sucked in the middle there for a long time. And I just, again, I felt like such a failure, and I felt like such a broken person, and I was ashamed of myself, and I was embarrassed, and I would stutter, and like, I had a couple friends that would reach out to me in that time, and I think of them as my angels legitimately that were sent to me to check on me, to make sure that I was okay. I didn't have a partner through this. I didn't want to get involved with another human because I felt like I was going to fall over dead at any moment. I just didn't want to bring somebody else into that mess. Interestingly enough, in conjunction with all of this happening, the other wonky thing that was going on with my body was that I had HPV. And that I was diagnosed with when I was 20, not too long after I remember getting a tick bite. And so I wonder if that timing all really was the catalyst moment, that tick bite. But again, we'll never really know. And so the HPV thing, I passed it. It went away on its own in my early 20s, and I was so grateful for it. But guess what came back after that super traumatic ending to that super toxic relationship? Oh, my HPV. And no, I wasn't sleeping around. You know, my mother, God love her, really didn't necessarily want me to talk about that initially because she was worried it would give people the wrong impression. And I just know from the amount of people that I've spoken to, the number of women that have this, and how many times it makes us feel like we are used or like abused fruit, whatever the word is I'm trying to think of right now. You know, it's really sad because it's something that generally women only are tested for, which don't even get me started on that. But men carry it. Where do you think we get it from? And it's not because of being overly promiscuous. It can happen to anybody, even with just one partner. We're not really sure, again, where it comes from sometimes. Yes, supposedly it's a sexually transmitted disease, but there are certain things that make you more susceptible for it, potentially having rendered your immune system non-functioning because of Lyme and tick-borne illness. But hey, here we go again. I get a little fired up about these things. And so that was all happening. And every now and again, I had to get, you know, I'd go for my pap smear, and then we'd say, oh, it's irregular, you need to get a colposcopy. And then they take a chunk out of your cervix, which they don't even numb you for. You just go and have the pleasure of having part of your organ cut out without any anesthetics or anything to numb you. And it's a huge violation, I felt like, of my soul, my being, right? And the first time, I guess, I think more that those feelings came later. The first time I was like, okay, cool, we'll do this and get this out of my body, fine. Then the second time it happened, and I was already starting to like learn a lot more about holistic healing and stuff. And I was like, okay, I guess. And then the third time that they want to do the surgery to me, I said, no. Now listen, this isn't working. If I have to keep coming back here for surgery, you're not getting to the root problem. Like, you're not fixing me. This is only just cutting out parts of my body that I might need. And you're pushing me closer and closer to having to need a hysterectomy. And I'm not down with that, right? Like, I like my body intact. God gave us the things that we have for a reason. And I don't want to just needlessly go hacking things out of my body. So I was pretty far along with my Lyme and tick-borne illness healing at this point, because I guess I'm jumping my time story here. So that HPV stuff is going on. Okay, fine. I had 2 surgeries. And then after the second surgery, I think is probably when the timeline sort of lines up with where I was getting my Lyme diagnosis, because I started to have very serious symptoms. I had heart palpitations. I was so dizzy when I was driving that I was afraid I was going to crash and kill someone else's family member, I think, which is really what scared me the most, to go back to Western medicine people, because I just wasn't getting anywhere, and I was tired of being told I was too stressed, and that was all in my head. And I had asked on Facebook at that point then for an Eastern-minded physician, because I just wanted somebody who might be able to help me get, again, to the root cause of really what was going on with my body, versus you're going to need this surgery, your body can't heal without it. There's nothing wrong with you, you're just too stressed, or you're an overly emotional female. All these horrible answers that were not the right answer for me. And I knew they weren't the right answer for me, but I just didn't know what the right answer was for me. And so I got sent to an office that's not too far from me here. And I'm so grateful for them, because that lady listened to me. Oh, I was actually losing the hearing in my left ear too. And I think the weekend before I went, I couldn't put a screw through a hole. It was 38 at the time, and I was trying to put a grill together, and I couldn't get the screw to go through the hole as hard as I tried. Like, I just kept looking at it and it just wasn't going. And I was like, this is really wrong. I'm 38. I think I've got a brain tumor. I had tested myself for everything else known to man. I thought at one point I had HIV, because I was having night sweats and insomnia and a couple other symptoms, the fatigue, et cetera, that were lining up with what Google will tell you HIV is. And so when I went and got tested for that, that's another interesting story. Like, I had so much anxiety and fear of that. When I went to Human Services to get that test done, the lady really didn't even give me opportunity to talk to her. She just basically swiped my mouth and told me to go sit in the corner and wait for 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, good God, okay. So I remember I was like, literally like my legs were going, you know, and then I was thinking about whoever was in the office below me. I'm so sorry for them, because I was just like, again, like a jackhammer. I was just, you know, reading these pamphlets that talk about how to share with a loved one that you've got HIV, and all those other tools that are there to help you deal with that diagnosis. And I was like, oh God. And when the lady came out, she didn't make eye contact with me. And so therefore I automatically assumed that's because she's trying to figure out how to tell me and how to break this to me that I have it. And I just burst into tears. And she's like, what's the matter with you? What, you know? And I was like, I have it, don't I? And she's like, no, you don't have it. What you need to do, what you have is a case of too much misinformation from Google, or too many bad thoughts put into your head from Google searches. Stay off the computer. Don't do this. My brother just did this to himself last week, is what she's telling me. And she gave me her card. God bless her. Very nice soul. I have gone back and seen her a couple of times after, just to keep up with regular testing. And I was just so grateful for her at that time. And so I knew it wasn't that, but that left me really thinking brain tumor again, because there was a lot of neurological things happening, and it just didn't make any sense. So it was right around, I think maybe, let's think, well, no, because I got diagnosed in August. So it's probably like middle of summer, right around where we are now, middle of July. And I told my parents that I loved them a lot, but I was going to the doctor the next day, and I was pretty sure I was going to get told I had a brain tumor. So I was just trying to prepare them. And I mean, I remember the look on their face, like, what? Because again, I had stopped talking about it years ago to anybody, you know, it just didn't bother. And when I went to that doctor, God bless her, she listened to me very clearly and thoroughly, did not dismiss me. She tested my heart. She gave me an EKG there on the spot. She checked in my ear. She couldn't see anything that would be causing deafness. And I was convinced that's because I had a tumor that was squeezing it from the inside out, and they were going to cut my head open and find a giant tumor. What else? And, you know, again, I was there for like 2.5 hours. She just spent a lot of time with me, and I was demanding all these things that I wanted to get tested for, because I just couldn't understand anymore what was going wrong with my body. And she was like, you know, I diagnosed 9 people this week already with Lyme disease. And mind you, it was only a Wednesday that she's already diagnosing 9 people. That just sort of blows my mind. But again, if we think 400,000 to 500,000 people a year are getting contracting it, okay, so that's probably not that far off. And so she sent me for blood work. I went right away. I got a call that Friday that had said I tested positive for Lyme disease. And thank God, right? Thank God I tested positive. I remember attending a lecture from Johns Hopkins University, and they had discussed the fact that the longer Lyme goes undetected in your body, the better or more likely you are to test positive to the standard 2-tier testing. Well, there's one silver lining to the whole situation, that I actually tested positive to this hokey test, and I had an answer. Great. And again, I was familiar with Lyme disease. I live in Pennsylvania. My dad is a retired ER physician. My mom was definitely slathering us with bug spray when we were kids. We were pretty well aware of it. And maybe throughout that time, it popped into my head that potentially that's what it was. I just never really explored it further, right? I thought I was going to have Bell's palsy, or I thought I would have a bullseye rash, or I thought all these other things like physical joint pain, which I really didn't have any of until more towards the end, like literally maybe a month before my diagnosis, things started to again get worse, which is what drove me back to a doctor. But I do remember towards the end trying to put my suitcase up in the overhead compartment, and my elbows hurt so bad I could hardly straighten my arms. But so mine was a lot more neurological, and that is not what I thought of Lyme disease at all. Little did I know. But I started on antibiotics then, and I think pretty much right away, I started to feel like a normal human. By this time, I think of myself as having been relegated to a zombie. I was a living, breathing zombie in a human flesh suit, but there was nobody home. The lights were on, but nobody was home. It was really, again, a challenge for me to function as a normal human. It was next to impossible. And sometimes I was grateful for my GPS because it would tell me where I was going, something as simple as the grocery store, but I couldn't remember. It was horrible. My brain was broken. I hated it. I'm a really smart person. I'm somebody who's a doer, and to be tired and have a broken brain are like some of the worst things that you could do to somebody like me. And I would feel sorry for myself too. But that took 7 years for that downward decline to happen. And then I got the diagnosis, I got on the antibiotics, and again, I started to feel so much better right away. Like I could keep up with conversations. I could remember what I was talking about. I didn't necessarily have that sensation so bad on the left side of my face anymore. The fatigue was lifting. And so I was like, okay, great. This is wonderful. And then maybe by the third or fourth week, they gave me 5 weeks of doxycycline. Third or fourth week, I started to feel funny again. And I was like, I was out to dinner with friends. We were having a conversation and I just couldn't remember anything again. And I was like, oh no. It was coming up, I think, more towards Thanksgiving or the holidays. And I was like, no, I'm not going back to zombie zone at this point. And I called the doctor. I asked for more medication. And I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening, but things are not right again. And she's like, all right, well, you need to get blood work done again. So I went. This time my testing came back equivocal, which I didn't know anything at the time, but I was like, great, it's not positive, it's not negative. So it's equivocal, which I thought to myself, I must be reverting back. It must be coming out of my body because it's no longer positive. Okay, so she gave me then another 3 weeks of doxy just because I think she knows me and she knew that I was not lying. And so once then I took that for 8 weeks, I was feeling a lot better. Not normal, but better. And then that Memorial Day, fast forward a couple months, that Memorial Day, I got bit by a mosquito, and then I had a bullseye rash on my leg. And I was positive that there's no way I would have missed a tick on that part of my leg. Like there's no way. And so I figured it had to have been a mosquito. I sent a picture to my doctor and she gave me 30 days of doxy just to be safe because she agreed with me that it looked like a bullseye rash. And I took it then. And when I came off it then, I just really did not feel right. Better, but still just not right. And well enough though that my brain was working again for me to start doing quick tick tips. If you've been following me for this long, you know I used to do things called quick tick tip, which I did my best to educate my community and people that follow me about some of the dangers of ticks, Lyme, their co-infections, some of the other problems that can happen when you come into contact with a tick, and how to stay safe from them, how to keep your family safe, how to protect your property, really anything and everything that I could think of to teach people. But I really saw the Bell's palsy in the left side of my face, and I was horrified because I was like, oh my God, no. I don't know how long it had been there, but that was the first time I had actually videoed myself when I was talking. It's one thing to put your makeup on in the mirror and you're not really moving your face, or another thing to take a selfie, but to actually have seen video footage of myself talking, I was like, So off I go to a Lyme specialist. I really did my best to avoid it because I understood by then how expensive it was going to be. in our state of Pennsylvania, the treatment through a Lyme specialist, unfortunately, is not covered by insurance. And so we are left to pay for these services on our own. The specialist that I went to see, I met her at an ILADS conference, and she is a nurse practitioner. So I think her rates were a little bit less egregious than a doctor. I was paying her $550 an hour. Physicians that I knew in the area were $1,200 an hour. So I don't know how you're supposed to do this. I would leave these appointments sobbing because I didn't have enough money to pay for this. I was getting myself into debt to fix my body, but I just kept believing that this was what I needed to do to get well. And gradually over time, the person I saw, Rita Rhodes, I don't think she has any issues with me sharing her name. She's been a great lifesaver to me, and I'm just so thankful for her. But, you know, she really understood more about tick-borne illness than anyone I had gone to see thus far, screened me for all the co-infections. Unfortunately, I had way more than just Lyme going on. I also had Bartonella, anaplasmosis, cytomegalovirus, elevated levels of Epstein-Barr. We already disclosed I had the HPV happening, and God knows what else was going on within my body. So then I got put on antibiotics, and I was course pulsing 4 different types over 2.5 years. And I did a lot of supplements along the way too. I was up to like $900 a month in different supplements. And again, I had to get a different job going through this because I couldn't afford to pay for myself to get well enough anymore. I had to find a different way. I was really into financial piece at the time. Dave Ramsey was a big influence to me because that relationship that was so toxic for me also left me with a ton of debt, unfortunately, that I had to work through. And that was also amplifying the shame and embarrassment and feelings of just dis-ease in my body, discontentment. Like there was another reason I didn't want someone else to come into my life, because I didn't want them to have to be yoked with the burden of how much debt I had allowed myself to get into. And then this problem now, Lyme disease, was only heightening that and making it worse, right? I could just, this mountain of debt. And so I got a new job that helped to afford treatment, but also it was a little bit less intense of an environment, which I felt very grateful for, that it gave me the space and the time that I needed to heal. Like I was really in a safe place that I could sort of maybe start to acknowledge that I had been stuck in survival mode for so long. And that's a huge shift to come out of the survival mode. And I'm still struggling with that sometimes, I think, actually, 6 years later. But, you know, it got so expensive. And then I was figuring out different holistic treatments that I could do. I mentioned the raindrop massage thing that I had gotten done. I was starting to do salt float tanks, salt rooms, Reiki, cord cutting, different energy work. What else was I doing? Seeing a therapist. I would try different things. Like in the interim of all this, I became an Ayurvedic practitioner. I went back to school for 2 years and got schooling in that, because I just felt very compassionate about helping others through this. Like once my brain started to work well enough again, and I was starting to really truly make tracks with my healing, I started the quick tips, started my social media campaign to educate other people, and started again learning about all these different ways that are available to heal the body outside of the standard Western medicine approach. And I'm so grateful for that. The Ayurveda is more about balancing body, mind, and soul to keep dis-ease from occurring in the first place, and different ways to suss out root causes of things for people. I became a Reiki practitioner myself. I also read palms and chirology. And that's, for those of you wondering, I find this one of my best tools to really see people. It's not that I can read your future for you, tell you how many kids you're going to have, where you're going to live, this kind of thing. But I can tell you, between your two hands, you can see so much information about people. And when I do these palm readings with people, usually what will happen is they'll start talking to me and sharing with me. And I can get a much more complete sense of their energy and who they are through this whole practice of doing the palm reading, spending the time with the person. Then I can really help to make some legitimate suggestions on how to help your body, or different things that you can do to put yourself more towards the direction of healing and helping yourself. And I love doing those. If you're interested to schedule a reading with me, please let me know. I can do them remotely. We just sometimes have to work a little bit to get an accurate picture of both hands, but I'll help guide you with those directions. But those sessions are so fun for me to work with people to do, again, because I can see a lot of past trauma and I can really help you with some good, legitimate suggestions to help to fix yourself because of all the things that I've done to fix myself. And sometimes, it's like an interesting way where we wind up at the end, but like, I feel a lot of why I went through what I did is to be here as a resource for others. I'm almost like a walking encyclopedia of how to fix yourself by now. Probably most people with Lyme and tick-borne illness that had it chronically. And we've just really learned, again, so many different things about healing. And I forget sometimes how much I actually know. And I'll be talking to someone, I'm like, oh, you should do this, or oh, you should do that. And they're like, how do you know this? And it's like, I don't even, it's just, I read a ton, I listen to a lot, I ask a lot of questions. And again, having walked a healing journey, I would say probably closer to 10 to 15 years, because those 7 years before I actually got a diagnosis, I assure you, I was begging and trying all kinds of things. I started to meditate because they told me I was too stressed. I went off of birth control. I changed everything that I came into contact with on my human body, like detergents and soaps and lotions and whatever else, because I thought maybe something like that was causing my problems. I was down to standing on tinfoil while brushing my teeth to dissipate electromagnetic frequencies because I could not understand what was going wrong with me, but I was researching everything under the sun known to help with the specific set of symptoms that I was experiencing. And nothing really ultimately mattered, no matter how many times I looked myself in the mirror and said, come on, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, girl, let's go. You're stronger than this. You can do this. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that fatigue was so set in that I just wanted to shrivel up and die and not move anymore because I was so sick. And I'd be so frustrated with myself because I really do believe in mind over matter, but I just could not get myself there overnight, and it was frustrating. And so that's also something I really want people to understand. Once the healing begins, I'm not saying it can't happen overnight, but for most people that I've come into contact with, it is not an overnight healing. It is something that is maybe possibly even a lifelong journey to fix yourself or to find optimal health. And that's okay. Nothing is ever going to be that fast or simple in a sense with the human evolution process. And so this is all, again, in accordance with helping us to evolve. I believe we choose these certain set of sicknesses or dis-ease to allow ourselves to expand and grow in the ways that we need. But sometimes it's really horrible and it's awful. And I really don't wish this on my own worst enemy, but I can help others to maybe see a better side of it, because it does change us. It does grow us. It does expand us. It does force us into a new version of ourselves, whether we want it to or not. And sometimes sickness can be the greatest catalyst for some of the best changes that we can make to ourselves in terms of self-love and self-care and acknowledging even just how self feels. Because if you don't, again, you're not probably going to get as far along with the healing as you would otherwise. And so I think that's pretty much my story. Like, how long was I sick? How long did it take me to heal? What happened with my diagnosis? When did I know I was getting better? I think pretty much the moment I got diagnosed, I knew I was going to get better. And I wasn't the type of person to go into the support groups or those dark places online that you can go and hear people constantly lamenting about how sick they are or spreading fear, in a sense, fear mongering. And it's not any fault of their own. It's just the reality that they're living in. But in my reality, I knew I didn't want to live in that space and that I was going to get better. And so I just set my hopes and sights on that. There was no stopping. I would go to my appointments with my doctor every 4 to 6 weeks. I'd leave there and I'd be like, okay, on to the next thing, right? Like, we're constantly making tweaks and adjustments, and I was trying new things and figuring out new things. Hot yoga, hello, that's another huge thing that I did for myself. And in the beginning, all I could do was pretty much lay in a ball and cry. And for those of you who don't practice yoga, do know, you don't have to be Gumby or Gumby's sister to go to do this. Like, that's why you go to practice, is to get more flexible, and yoga is something great for all people, but yoga will also help us to release traumas. And for those, again, who are not familiar, the body oftentimes keeps trauma trapped inside of it, whether we're aware of that or not. There's some great books coming to mind. The Body Keeps the Score by I always forget his name. I have it back here on my shelf. Found it. The Body Keeps the Score. Where are you? Not seeing it. Anyways, Vander Holt, Vander Kolk, Vander somebody, and I'm sure you can find it. And then Louise Hay wrote a book, Heal Your Body, which is also another great resource on just, again, understanding some of the different ailments that happen within the body and the different body parts and traumas that could be trapped in the certain areas or beliefs or mantras that we're holding. And so many times with yoga, again, you're doing postures and it's pulling us or opening us up in different places that we're not accustomed to being open. And these things are then slipping out and releasing. And sometimes we'll cry. And that's actually a good thing because you're releasing some of this trapped ama, to use an Ayurvedic word, toxins or poisons that have accumulated in the body. And trapped emotions are another version of a toxin that's caught in the body. And so hot yoga really helped. But again, I really never accepted not getting well as an outcome. Like I just knew in my heart that I was going to get better. I've always been wired like this as a very determined person, I guess. And sometimes I look at my own journey and think of it as like I had to turn myself into a soldier through that time period in particular. The first 4 years of healing especially was very regimented, constantly on shifts and cycles of taking supplements. And God bless my boss, you know, I'd travel with him and he'd be like, hey, look, your buzzer's going off. You must need to take some medicines. Like he would encourage me and help support me on that and not make me feel weird about it. I changed my diet. I eliminated gluten, dairy, sugar. I don't drink alcohol anymore. I don't drink caffeine anymore. These are all things that actually I am grateful for and I chose now to do because I just didn't want them anymore. It reminds me about The People versus Larry Flynn, if you've seen that movie or you know the story, that he was in the accident, he had a lot of pain, he was on painkillers, and once he had his pain fixed, he no longer needed the painkillers and he was able to sober himself up. And that's kind of the way that I see this. It's like I was really sick for a while. I needed a lot of the alcohol or different things to help myself because I couldn't tolerate feeling things, right? But once I got better and the pain was gone and the dis-ease was removed, I no longer needed that because I didn't have such an intense thing that I had to feel. Like I processed a lot of it. Or I can think of it as like a giant ball of static, right? All these different layers of static together. And then you find one and you pull it out. And okay, then you've got a little bit less static happening and you find another, pull it out and a little bit less. And over time, eventually then becomes a lot more smooth. And that was one of my goals. I can remember with one of my coaches through this was that I wanted to smooth and protect my energy. And I feel that I've gotten into a much more smooth and protected place with my energy and it feels so much better. But it's all like, it's not just a physical healing, like you've got to do a lot of the spiritual healing, the soul healing. And, you know, I talk a lot about spiritual health and I think people have this misnomer where they're thinking about God or going to church or whatever spiritual means to them. And for me, spiritual, just more, when I talk about spiritual health, is like more of what's going on inside. What is inside saying to you? How does inside feel? How do you feel as a human? Are you happy? Are you sad? Do you have anxiety? Do you have depression? What are you feeling here? Can you even feel what you're feeling here? Sometimes I think we've got such walls up around even feeling that we can't even suss out really how we are. And a great tool to help us to get a little bit of clarity with this is journaling, right? You just sit and write and have no judgment against yourself. Just let it freely come out of your being, what you're feeling. You can do some different exercises around energy and releasing anger. You know, there's just so much that we can do to help us to heal. But again, for me, I knew I was always going to get better. And this is partially why I want to do this podcast, because I think about the stories that I read or the different people that I came into contact with that were healing themselves while I was doing the same or had already done so before I got to that point. And I just clung to those stories, and I would be like, man, I got this. If that person can do it, I got this. I can do this. And it just encouraged me. So, and that's really, again, why I want to do these podcasts, to help to encourage others that were like me, that were stuck there, that really just needed to hear those stories to kind of help fuel us along. And then, you know, I think there was times as I was going through my healing journey that I knew I was healing. And maybe it's more of who I am as an individual, but I can remember on my 40th birthday, for example, I had been staying at my aunt's house. I was dog sitting for her that week, and I felt so luxurious at her house. And I said, well, I wonder if I could just lay here on the floor for an hour and see what would happen if I could just physically tolerate laying flat on my back on the floor for an hour. I have no idea what inspired me to do this. I was practicing meditation and just, okay, here. So I laid there, and I wound up laying there, I think actually for 4 hours, which just, how does someone lay on their back for 4 hours straight while they're awake? And it was almost like universe was working through my body. It was not me, it was God. You know, and I could see, I sometimes still picture it almost like a jellyfish that was sweeping through my body and resetting my system. And, or like the gears on a clock, slowly but surely each getting turned slightly and adjusted. And this whole thing just kept sweeping through my entire body. My body was cracking, like I was just laying there and my body was cracking and kind of realigning itself. And I remember I was so sore the next day, but I was inclined to do it again. And I did exactly the same thing the next day, although I think it was more like 5 or 6 hours that day that I stayed there in that position. And it was just one of the most beautiful things ever. I wish that I had a brain scan of what was going on in my body or something, like some kind of energy reading, something, because it was wild and beautiful. And I'm just so grateful. But I had many experiences like that during my healing time. I would see hawks swoop down. I had a hawk swoop down in front of my car one time, and it landed on a squirrel, unfortunately, but it literally sat there in front of my car with its wings completely stretched out for like 5 minutes while it was killing the squirrel. But I would inch a little bit more with my car and it wouldn't even move. And I mean, it was wild. I was standing outside another time and a hawk swooped down and was literally maybe 2 inches from my head. I mean, I was standing there, I had my mouth open because I was just so in awe, like I saw it coming. And I mean, I really wasn't afraid of what's it going to do to me. But it just came so close and it was so beautiful. But there were so many times like that I would see these things happen, or you know, try to think about some other things. I would have some intense breathing sessions, breathwork sessions. I'd be driving and I would just have this crazy visualization of something. Oh, I went to Padre Pio's shrine. That was another beautiful encounter. I went the one time, and if you're not familiar with Padre Pio, he's a saint of healing people, and he was actually a contemporary in a sense. He died back, I think, in the 70s or the 80s, not that long ago in a sense, and he was healing people. But there's a shrine for him not too far from where I live, and for whatever reason I was drawn to it, and I stopped the one day and I went, and I remember begging God for my life, and I was crying a lot, and I was just very upset because I was so sick and I just didn't understand what was wrong with me. And this little old lady came out from the bookstore, and I'll never forget, it was the face of God for sure. She talked to me. She had no idea what's going on with me, but she pretty much begged me to just hold on, right? She was like, it's going to be okay. Just hold on. You're going to get better. Padre Pio is working on you. It's going to be fine. You're going to get better. And like, that was a really magical encounter for me. It made me cry. Not that that's a surprise. That state where I was, again, I was crying all the time, but that made me cry just because I felt that God was with me there, you know, and there were so many times where I felt like God was not with me, that I was crawling through this dark, evil pit of disease by myself. But when I look back now, I know that God was carrying me the whole way. There was no other way that I was going to have made it through that space. But again, I had a lot of these healing moments, and I was just very grateful for them because they were like breadcrumbs to my soul that let me know I was on the right track, and they encouraged me to keep going because it got hard a lot, you know, to completely redo your life as a human from everything that everyone else likes to participate in, bad for you foods or whatever, or alcohol, this, that, and to redo yourself to come out the other side completely different is not that easy. But thankfully, the way that I was able to do it. And again, I'm just grateful that I'm here still to help others figure out how to help themselves. And so what I've begun working on is the silver liming. As you know, I've got my podcast here. I have my website, and I'm working on a book. I'm almost finished, actually. I'm really excited this time around. Trying to write a book is a lot easier with these stories that I just want to share for people, again, to hear about their healing. But then again, I'm also starting to work with people to help you figure out ways to heal yourself. Ultimately, it comes down to you. You need to do the work. I can't do it for you, but I can guide you and I can help you and I can show you different ways to help heal yourself. And so, you can visit my website if you're interested to set up a consultation. You can reach out to me on social media in any way possible that you can get in touch with me. Happy to schedule an appointment with you or some consultation time just to go through things and maybe give you a second set of eyes or a fresh set of eyes, or somebody who might have a little bit or a lot more experience, depending on who you are, in healing. And I am just really, again, grateful that I'm still here to be able to do this, to be able to share this information with you, to be able to offer teachings to you on my website. Right now, I have one video up already. I think it's called Premium Videos. I'm still maybe going to potentially change the name of that section, not sold on it, but Premium Videos. You can go under there. I have a video posted already that's about an hour long, and it goes through some of the initial things that you might want to think about when diagnosed with Lyme disease, or some of the resources and tools that I used when I first got diagnosed that really made a big difference to me to help me to heal. There are so many, gratefully, but also sometimes overwhelmingly so, because what worked for me might not work for you, might not work for you. But in hearing what I've gone through and the things that I have, it might also give you some ideas about things that you could try that you haven't thought of or that you haven't tried yet. And I've had quite a few people watch this video already, and they say that it's very well laid out. It's easy to listen to and follow. And so if you're interested in that, that's there for you. You can find that at thesilverlyming.com. And I'm also working on some additional series of videos to help people. And some of them will be available for purchase. Some of them I'm going to keep as free. If you follow me on YouTube or Facebook, or Instagram, wherever, you will also see I have a lot of videos already posted that you can watch about different healing techniques that you can do for free. And some of the things that you would actually have to pay for, what I'm working on is, I think, about a 4-hour introduction to Ayurveda and how it can help you to heal from Lyme disease or chronic illness. And again, that's a lot of information and knowledge that I share. And so for these types of things, I do ask for a little bit of financial compensation. But for the most part, if it's a short video or something quick and easy, it will be available for free, because I want people to be able to heal. I want you to not feel stifled by the cost, because again, I understand full well the cost of healing yourself, but I also understand the cost of what I've put into some of this information and education that I will share with you. And so it's only fair for me to get compensation. I do my best to keep them at a very low cost point for you, however, because again, I get it. I have probably close to $100,000 worth of debt from my healing adventure. And who knows what I actually was able to keep up with. That's just the stuff that I couldn't afford, but there was things that I was paying for in cash at the time as things were going. So Lord knows how much that ultimately came down to. Speaking of one thing, I will mention quickly, if you are having to use Western medicine, antibiotics, and you are going to pharmacy, please make sure you ask about the coupon card. This is something that I only became aware of after my 2.5 years with antibiotics that were supposedly covered by my insurance. But this coupon card that they have, you are able to get discounts on antibiotics, which made them half the cost of what it was still with my insurance. And so please do yourself a favor. That's a great cost savings hack. I can give you a lot of those. Those are the kinds of information that I made available in that first video that's there posted now, and that's available for you to view. And so words of advice or encouragement that I have for people is basically don't give up, right? I can say it was really lonely and dark and hard, and I struggled tremendously many times in the really dark, sick space. But it does change. It slowly starts to get better. You slowly start to pull yourself out of that space. And again, it's not usually an overnight fix. It's something that takes continual effort and showing up for yourself. I often have the other visualization of, every little change that we make, we could picture as like a little pebble, and we throw them all together. And ultimately, we're able to climb out of the dark hole that we're in when we have Lyme and tick-borne illness. You just have to start gradually changing the current, changing the tide as you go, and it will start to snowball and get easier and easier. And with the support of an ILADS trained physician or nurse practitioner like I had, I feel that she got me about 85% of the way with her guidance and tutelage, and then the rest I had to do on my own. And so I'm just grateful that I was able to think well enough again to do the research to figure out different ways to help myself. I'm grateful that I had Eastern-minded or energy-minded friends to introduce me to some new ideas and concepts that I missed going through having been raised more in the Western medicine world. And interestingly, I had 2 grandfathers that were doctors, 2 uncles, my father, a cousin, and I have a bunch of others in the medical profession yet that I'm related to. So we are definitely a Western-minded family. And I can remember at one point when a chiropractor was a bad word in my house, growing up in my household. But gratefully, I rose above the fear of these things that I wasn't familiar with. Really, I guess is probably stranger danger of things that you don't know about, and start to try them. And now look, I actually practice some of them myself, that I've become trained to offer these things to people. Another thing that I learned was theta healing. It's another brainwave state energy work that we can do to help to reprogram subconscious programs that we've inherited that no longer serve us. And so there's just so much we can do to help ourselves heal. Stay open, stay curious. Remember to be your own best advocate, because nobody else is going to do this for you. You need to do it yourself. Doctors have the best intentions, but they don't understand the war that's waged inside your body. They don't understand how you're feeling. You can tell them, but it's still not the same as them living and experiencing what's going on inside you. We're all different. We have bio-individuality. We have different subsets of co-infections. We have different propensities towards certain illnesses. And we can control a lot of this. We can fix a lot of this by understanding what our own body needs, what our own individual needs to help us to heal and get better. But without possibly sometimes people like myself or other people who practice healing to help you, you're maybe not going to get there as fast, or it's going to just be that much harder for you. So don't be afraid to reach out for help as well. That was another lesson that I learned through this sickness, is asking for help, speaking up, talking about how I feel, acknowledging things within inside myself so that I was able to lance it and excise it, get it out of me, and come to a greater place of understanding and inner peace with self. It makes a huge difference. Huge. We have the power. We have the power. We have the power to heal ourselves. We just need to harness it. And figuring out how to harness it is things that people like me can help you to do if you're struggling to do it on your own. There's a plethora of books, as you see behind me. I've read these books. They've all helped me to learn more about self, how to relate self to world, how to help myself heal, and consequently then how I can potentially help others heal as well. And it's really beautiful. That would be probably one of the best things that I could say that I've gotten out of this thing. And that's one of my favorite questions to ask people, as weird as it is. What has been the best thing that has happened to me coming into contact with Lyme and tick-borne illness? And I think ultimately it's the ability to have learned self well enough that I can love myself again. And self-love has been one of the greatest gifts that I've gotten out of this time with tick-borne illness. I have so many other things, like just watching this journey has been one of the most beautiful things that I've been lucky enough to witness. And again, for those who are still really sick, know that this can be your story too. It was really hard in the middle. I am not sugarcoating that. I am not trying to say it wasn't. It was hard as heck. Trying to keep it clean, but you know what I really want to say there? It was impossible, but not, because obviously I did it. So it's possible. And you just have to keep reminding yourself about that, I learned a lot of skills about myself: resilience, determination, strength, courage, bravery, all of these things that we who are living this chronic existence with Lyme go through. And I really learned again how to love myself. The silver lining has come out of this. This is another beautiful gift: the ability to connect with people, to understand them, to be a more empathetic human. Not that I necessarily needed that. I think I had that pretty much down before any of this even happened to me, but it has fine-tuned that quite a bit. And it's just kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. When I look back and I see how far I've come, I'm so grateful and I'm so excited. And I still have so far to go. We'll never be completely there at the end, right? That would be meaning we just expire. Like there's no purpose left to live because we've learned everything that we need to. And until I die, I will be continuously looking to evolve, to grow, to expand, to learn, to figure out different ways, different approaches, how I can relegate information differently to people so that they can see it differently and help maybe get a perspective shift. Because really, when I look, all the healers that I come into contact with, whether it be a massage, Reiki, speaking, breath work, really whatever they all come down to, theta healing, EFT, tapping, just all of these different things, they're ultimately perspective changers or perspective shifters, right? They all added something to my repertoire of understanding of healing to help me to get there. But I had to put the pieces together. I had to do the work. They could feed me the information, but then I had to do something with it. I had to actually grasp onto the change that they were transposing to me and put it into effect inside myself to manifest a different outcome. And small changes equal really large results in the end. And so every little thing that you can do for yourself to help yourself to heal, whether it feels ridiculous or not, in the end, it will make a big difference and an impact on your ability and your speediness of healing. There is no timeline per se that's right or wrong for you either. Don't feel like you should be further along than you are. You're exactly where you need to be. And with healing, you will maybe sometimes feel like you take 3 steps forward and get yanked back into a completely different universe or planet. But just know that's normal, and you just keep going again and start taking the steps forward. One of my favorite analogies is, how do you eat an elephant? And for those of you who have watched me, you know the answer. 1 bite at a time. Lyme and tick-borne illness is the giant elephant in the room. Sometimes it doesn't even get acknowledged, unfortunately. But for those of us who do acknowledge it and do realize that there is a very large elephant sitting in the room, we know the best way to get rid of that is just 1 bite at a time, and go slowly but surely. You will ultimately win the race. I promise. You can heal. You have the power. You have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone, however, and figure out some different ways. If you're stuck, again, feel free to reach out to somebody like me. Ultimately, in the end, I pray for all of us to find health and abundance and wellness again within our soul, because in the end, life is not really worth living if we don't have our health. I think about this so many times. You could have all the money in the world, you could have all the riches, you could have the nicest homes, cars, clothing, whatever your little heart desires. But if you don't feel well, it really doesn't matter. And so my wish is for all humans to have good quality of life, health, and wellness in their bodies. So please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to spend some time working with you and helping you if you're feeling stuck, but you can get better. And remember, my journey with Lyme and tick-borne illness has been one of the greatest things that has happened to me for so many reasons. And when people ask me, would I change it? My answer at this point is no, I would not change it. Had you asked me that 6 years ago when I was still trying to figure out what was wrong with me, yes, I would have changed it in a heartbeat. But now, having gone through everything, looking back and seeing it all happen sequentially, I say no, thank you. I really appreciate this, God. I am so grateful for this experience. It has taught me so much. It has developed me so much as a human. It has helped me to evolve and to grow and expand and have purpose in life. And I also, interestingly, right before my diagnosis, had decided I was going to put more time with Make-A-Wish Foundation. I just really felt compelled to help people who have children who are sick and struggling. I just thought that would be such a good thing for me to put my heart towards. And sure enough, then I got my diagnosis with Lyme disease. So be careful what you wish for. Sometimes I was asking God to help to give me purpose in life, and He gave me purpose in life in a really loud way. So again, be careful for what you wish for, but at this point, I really wouldn't change this or trade this because it has made me so much better of a human. And I also hope that those who have experienced this will come out of this journey saying the same thing as me. God bless you all. Thank you for listening and sharing your time with me. And I look forward to sharing many more healing stories with you. Again, you can find me here on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and now I've got my podcast streaming, hopefully to all podcast streaming sites such as Spotify, and potentially I think on Apple now, and iHeartRadio. There's a lot of them. So you can find me really anywhere. And I just am grateful for all of your love and support through this time and encouragement, because it really made a difference to me. Each one of you that over time would reach out to me and encourage me along and say, thank you for your videos. Thank you for the information you shared with me. It helped save my life. A lot of times those messages would come to me and I was like, maybe I'm kind of done with this. I don't know if I should do this anymore. And I'd get those messages and I'd say, yes, it's imperative that I continue to do this. My soul feels compelled to talk with you about these things, to share with you more about these things, to help educate you and to walk with you on your journey. Know that you are never alone. God is always with you. And if it's hard to see that, find other friends and support in the Lyme network, in the Lyme community, because we're all here to help to support each other along the way. Thank you again for listening, and take care.